I'm Dominic Dibble, and I'm working from the London Centre, and I'm pleased today to be joined by my colleagues from the Geneva Centre, Vince van der Velde and Florian Harvey. And they will be addressing the theme of global crises, global opportunities, which is the second in our series, the second in our series of 3 webinars, which are in preparation for the World Goodwill Seminar on the 14th of November. And I believe Mintz and Florian will be saying something a little more about that when it comes to their part of the meeting. Before that, as you know, we will be doing the Goodwill Meditation. So let's start off by reflecting. For those who don't know, the Goodwill Meditation Group is a global group of people who link up each Wednesday at noon to meditate on the energy of goodwill. And the group aims to stimulate and strengthen the goodwill already in humanity as a whole. And the webinar this happens every Wednesday, as I said. And the webinar meets on the last Wednesday of each month, and to give us a platform for individuals to come together to use the Goodwill meditation and to discuss our work and to discuss the work of World Goodwill in the light of the energy of goodwill. Goodwill, as we know, is love in action, and it exists in all human relationships that carry a note of loving intention. It is positive, it's a dynamic energy, and it can be consciously used for the betterment of humanity and the whole earth. Goodwill is, in essence, the name we give to the potent energy of divine will as it's expressed through human relationship. And this powerful energy overcomes all separating forces and has the potential to transform all aspects of our societies and the planet itself. Goodwill redeems, it unifies, and it reveals the essential goodness underlying all phenomenal expression. The existence of goodwill is evidence of the link between humanity, the spiritual hierarchy, and the divine dimensions of being. So now, without further ado, we'll go into our work of meditating together. I just want to double check that everyone can hear me. Michael, can you hear me? I don't want
Yeah,
to.
Dominic, we can hear you perfectly, so everything's good.
Thank you, Michael. So let's now prepare ourselves for meditation. And before we begin, let's recall that we are sharing this effort with thousands of other people of goodwill around the world. And realize that essentially we are souls, and as such have telepathic rapport with all souls. And remembering that energy follows thought, we recognize that meditation is not a passive, reflective form of devotion, but a positive, creative use of the mind, actively linking the inner and the outer worlds. So we use our creative imagination to see ourselves at one with all humanity and with all that is progressive, spiritual, and working for human welfare and right human relations. So let us now begin. We link up in thought with all those people throughout the world who are working in unison as part of the Goodwill Meditation Group. we reflect upon the fact of relationship. We're related to our families, our communities, our nations, the world of nations. The one humanity made up of all races, peoples, and nations. We use the mantra of unification. The souls of all are one, and I am one with them. I seek to love, not hate. I seek to serve, and not exact due service. I seek to heal, not hurt. Let pain bring due reward of light and love. Let the soul control the outer form, and life and all events, and bring to light the love that underlies the happenings of the time. Let vision come and insight. Let the future stand revealed. Let inner union demonstrate, and outer cleavages be gone. Let love prevail. Let all people love. Reflect upon your own and humanity's relationship with all those beings who dwell in the higher realms of mind and heart, those who are known as the spiritual hierarchy of saints, rishis, bodhisattvas, and masters, honored by all the world's religions and spiritual groups and traditions. Imagine that you are standing together within the center of the spiritual hierarchy, immersed in the consciousness of the heart of love. This heart of love has many names. The Christ is one name, other faiths have other names for the one at the center, such as Maitreya, the Imam Mahdi, and the Kalki avatar. Maintaining that high point of contact, let your thoughts reach out to include all members of the human family in whom the energy of goodwill is active. Use the affirmation: in the center of all love, I stand. From that center, I, the soul, will outward move. From that center, I, the one who serves, will work. May the love of the Divine Self be shed abroad in my heart, through my group, and throughout the world. Visualize the energy of love flowing from the hierarchy through all people of goodwill into the hearts and minds of humanity, infusing them with goodwill, creating loving and harmonious relationships. Meditate on ways of spreading goodwill, creating right human relationships, and restoring peace on earth. Realize that you're helping build a channel between the spiritual hierarchy and humanity, through which the energy of goodwill may flow, uniting humanity, solving its problems, and healing all differences and cleavages. Linked in thought with people of goodwill throughout the world, we say the great invocation with deliberation and full commitment to its meaning, knowing that we are radiating its potent energies to humanity. From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into human minds. Let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into human hearts. May the coming one return to earth. From the center where the will of God is known, let purpose guide all little human wills, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center which we call the human race, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Thank you everyone for your participation. Some of you will be aware, of course, that we're within the full moon period of the sign of Libra, and I'm sure that that's contributing to the fact that that seemed like a particularly potent meditation. So now that we've done the work, it's time for the fun to start. So I'd like to invite Minsa and Florian to take the stage and share some thoughts with us on global crises and global opportunities. Over to you, gentlemen.
Hello, Dominic, and hello, friends and everybody around. As Dominic said, this webinar is the second in a series in running up to the World Goodwill Seminar, which will be on Saturday 14th in Geneva, New York, and London. The theme of the seminar will be the spiritual dynamics of crisis on the path of global cooperation. Normally, Geneva would make this a two-day event with 1 day at the United Nations and 1 day elsewhere. But due to the restrictions of the COVID pandemic, we decided to make it a 1 day event. And that means that actually it will be one big seminar in Geneva, London, New York. If I take a perspective from Geneva time-wise, Geneva will start in the morning, Geneva time. London will take the afternoon, and New York will be in the evening for Geneva. Michael, did you prepare a slide with the timings?
I did not, but I'll have that up by the end of the meeting.
Ah, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, then you get at the end of the seminar, we will have a slide with the timings for your time zone, which is easier to see when you should log in for the seminar. In the first World Goodwill webinar of August, we have been looking at the spiritual significance of crisis. And one of the issues discussed there was the notion of the nation state. Now, in addition to what has been said at that seminar, I would just like to add one point that like a personality has a soul, also a nation does have a soul. Often, and especially in times of crisis, we are faced with the personality aspects of nations, which despite beautiful diplomatic talking, equally often are selfish without much consideration for other nations. But eventually, the soul qualities of a nation will come through, which by definition are always inclusive and group conscious. The tricky word here is eventually, which might mean tomorrow, in a year, in a century, or even later. That depends on the more advanced people in a nation. It seems a platitude, but please do remember that any outer manifestation starts on the inner planes, that means in consciousness. For the individual soul, crises are known to be opportunities. As a matter of fact, the soul doesn't make much of progress, if any, without such a crisis. But today we are looking at global crisis in the scale of humanity or mankind as a whole. There too, crises have almost been there. Just to mention some very big ones, in Lemurian times and Atlantean times, we know that large portions of humanity have been wiped off of the surface of the earth. But these crises were also um, an opportunity. For example, individualization came about, a major step forward for humanity. A more recent crisis is the crisis of the Great War, roughly 1914 to 1945. That crisis led, for example, to the establishment of the United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the Four Freedoms, etc. These are really milestones in the recent history of mankind. This week, we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the establishing of the United Nations. And for those of you who are involved in the cycle of conferences, you will know that we have put the focus of this cycle on the whole week, or even more, it's about a week and a half of this event. Today, we are faced with a conjunction of a number of crises, which perhaps form one big existential crisis. We have climate change, the depletion of the Earth's resources at a record pace, a financial crisis, and last but not least, if there are no other crises, the health crisis, the COVID-19 virus. We might think that all of this forms a major opportunity for mankind to make a big step forward. But then please don't forget that these crises are not abstract subjects. For many people all over the world, these crises are real and cause an enormous amount of suffering. What can people of goodwill do about these crises? To shed some light on this, I want to share some thoughts for discussion, which come from the Tibetan, which he wrote in 1939, so that's before the second part of the Great War, in Esoteric Psychology, Volume 2. But I think it's still of relevance today. The Tibetan wrote, "Only that is of importance to us which provide a needed momentum for action, and which will also give the working disciple of the world a vision of sufficient clarity and an adequate incentive to enable him to work with sincerity and understanding." He then goes on and gives a certain number of practical points. I will only summarize a few of them. One is the renewed organization of the new global world servers. Now, this is perhaps something where we have made some progress. Since the World War, we are now living in a world with thousands, if not millions, of NGOs, non-governmental organizations. If we think of the festival week of the new global world servers, which we observed in December last year, it drew a lot of interest all over the world. The second point is the awakening of the intelligentsia in all countries to the recognition of humanity as a prelude to the establishment of brotherhood. The unity of the human family is recognized by many, but before that unity can take form in constructive measures, it is essential that the more and more of the thinking men and women throughout the world should break down the mental barriers existing between races, nations, and types, and that the new group of world servers should itself repeat the outer world, in the outer world, that type of activity which the hierarchy is expressing in the inner world. Through the expression and impression of certain great ideas, men and women all over the world must be brought to the understanding of the fundamental ideals which will govern the new age. This is the major task of the world servers. Of course, many of you know this phrase because it is the keynote of the new moon meditation. I will leave it from my part and I will give the floor to Florian.
Hello, everyone. It was a good point to remind ourselves that nations have souls as well. They have personality and they have souls, because when we talk about the crisis, we can describe a crisis as one dominant form of expression which is being challenged by another form of expression. But such crises, there can be crises between two personality expression, so to speak. So the types of crisis that we seek to discuss in such a place as a World Goodwill webinar is a crisis between the personality and the soul. The question of the emerging trend of the soul is the topic. And so we are talking about the crises, large and small, that come to the forefront of our consciousness as a result of the growth of soul energy. And when crises are presented in this way, it should make it more obvious for us to understand that the discernment of the opportunities of the crisis rests on our ability to perceive and discern that soul influence that makes the crisis surface in the first place. And the point about this is that it requires of us a state of mind and a disposition of character that opposes the more evident state of mind of distress and reactivity and finger pointing that often go along with period of crisis. So there is this idea that every time we think, we use mental substance. And so we clothe spirit. And this form aspect at some point becomes a constraint for the spirit that wants to express itself. And so crises are rhythmic, right? Crises are a normal part of expansion. But talking about thoughts, another point that needs our attention, and it's a little bit more esoteric, but I think this is also a good place to discuss these sort of ideas, is that our thoughts are made up of tiny lives. This is one of the premises of ageless wisdom. Life is everywhere. So the building up of our thoughts create a form, a living thought form. And to the measure that we start to pay more attention to the thought form itself rather than to the guidance of the soul or the inspiration that created the thought in the first place, to that extent, we will let the form ensnare us. So the crises of the world today are the compounded sum total of all the thoughts that we are thinking, and that gradually ensnare us somehow. And the world today, what do we have in the world today? To some extent, I don't want to be too pessimistic or use one, make a diagnosis, and perhaps your diagnosis will be different, and perhaps we can share that later on. But say we have attributed a financial value to everything. There's this sense that we live in a sort of a cloud where everything is defined by our success to hold the maximum amount of that value, of this quantifier, which finally is a tangible quantifier. It's money. So we go about our life withdrawing value from the common heritage in order to create our own personal treasure vault. And to the measure that we succeed in this endeavor, we endanger others. And I mean, we see people dying, crossing waters in raft because they seek to live decent lives. And it seems that our reaction is to raise up fences and find excuses, and so that we can actually maintain the status that we have. So the pattern builds up, and the pattern is rhythmic. It is not necessarily the ritual aspect of rhythm, but there is a rhythmic aspect to it. And our current system now functions, of course, it functions on the basis of supply and demand, but when we consider the innate urge to continuously increase profit for oneself, and taking into account the progress made in the field of psychology and marketing, to name just these, what comes about is a transformation of the capitalism, which was just a capitalism of trade and bargain, to a capitalism which is more of an addiction-based paradigm. We understand how people consume. We try to get into under people's skin, I think is the expression, to promote consumption. And so this is a medical term, addiction-based paradigm, and it's aimed at the sustaining of consumption. And this is a danger and a threat. It's a danger because it makes us unconscious. It provides to us something without us really making a conscious claim for it. It provides it to us too easily. And so, to some extent, this is where we are going as well. It's the topic of a crisis in consciousness.
Maybe that's a good point for discussion.
And perhaps that's absolutely that's a good point for discussion.
Maybe Dominic, we can open up here.
Yes. I think that's a very good place. You've given a very rich sharing of ideas and thoughts. And I see that there are already a couple of comments in the chat. And also, you may be familiar with the process of raising your hand if you want to make a verbal contribution, and we can then unmute you and you can speak your mind and your heart. But I'm going to read out a couple of the ones that are in the chat. We're from Matthew Martin. And this is one that I wanted to pick up on, actually. The soul of a nation can be known as the highest spiritual values of that national consciousness. And I wondered, that this is a tricky area, because I was going to say, well, can we identify some nations as being closer to expressing their soul and others not? But maybe one shouldn't name names, because then we're all going to get very excited about, oh, what about my country, you know? So,
well, Dominic, of course, the Netherlands are very.
oh, of course, yes.
I mean, this is a joke. No, this is a very tricky question.
Yes, but what I was thinking is maybe we should more think in terms of what are the sorts of things we expect to see within government, within civil society, in different countries that are getting a bit closer. So maybe you'd like to say something about that, and maybe our audience would like to think about what are the signs, what makes you think, oh, the government in that country has got things a bit more sorted out, you know. And
yes, well, there are some signals. As I said in the introduction, what is the quality of the soul? It's group consciousness, and it is inclusive. We have been faced lately with let's say, a migrant crisis here in Europe. And let me make very clear, this is we are on ice here, so it's very tricky to say. But to my mind, one glimpse of a soul was just shining through when Germany said, okay, there is a crisis of migrants. We open up our border to a number of people. It gave a huge conflict in Germany itself, but it was a signal for the rest of Europe. And other countries said, well, okay, if Germany is doing it, then we have to do it too. So these are where we see inclusivity and where we see group consciousness. There is where the soul shines through. And I think everybody can notice that in his or her country or not. I mean, the opposite is also true. You can see if a country is really closing the borders, putting up high fence. I certainly wouldn't call that the soul is shining through. So this is, we are here in Geneva, we are used to diplomatic talk. We have to be a little bit careful by giving too black and white examples. But if you want to look for soul influences, I would go for where are countries inclusive? I mean, at a certain point, the global community was writing off the depth of a number of countries in the south. Those are glimpses where the soul is shining through. Okay, this I hope this is a start of an answer.
Yes, it's a very good point, and I think you've yeah. And actually, that leads on to another thought about, as you say, it's about leadership. Somebody else has commented in the chat. We've got a hand up. But before I go to John Horan, let me just quickly say what Isa has said, or Isa. The fourth crisis is an absence of illumined and wise leadership in business and nations. So leadership and how leaders express in some way the soul of a nation or can attempt to do so is something to ponder. However, I'm going to unmute John Horan. Let's see, can I? Yes, here you go, John.
Thank you, Dominic. It's very helpful to hear the idea of addiction, because we see both the higher and lower aspects of it. When we talk about addiction, we're mostly thinking about substance abuse on the individual level. But it's no surprise that hoarding, of being addicted to materialism, is truly the great illness of our society. The fact that we put our sense of security, of wholeness, of belief in mere matter. And I'm just very pleased that you had brought that up, for it appears to me that they are both reflections of the same effect at work. While some people hide within substances by taking them and ingesting them, others hide behind substance by trying to pile up as much as they can. And I think that's an excellent starting point for how we might begin to understand the free circulation and flow of this life-giving force, this clothing that we call matter. With that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, John. Florian, Minza, do you have any thoughts?
Oh, I think it is indeed an interesting way for us to put the spotlight on the crises of the world, to try to discern how things happen. We had in the first part of this webinar the meditation, and we are reminded that energy follows thought. So if the crises are made up of the form aspect, what happens is that there is a reverse esoteric process where the form wants to sustain itself via our attention. And so this is where there is a sort of a dependence, if you will. There are mechanisms of the world that feed upon the attention that we provide to them, because our attention is essentially a commodity. If we talk now about the digital world, and it will become more obvious what I'm trying to speak about. There was this quote which we were reminding of a few days ago: when a product is free, it is because you are the product. When a service is free, it's because you are the product. It flips things around in our minds, that our attention is worth a lot of money when it is monetized by the form aspect, in reverse to the consciousness. Perhaps I'm not very clear in what I'm trying to express, but otherwise there is something there.
I just want to add another thought, which is not diagonal but parallel to it. There are thinkers in the world which are suggesting other ways of going about money and capital and things like that. I just want to mention one person, which is Charles Eisenstein. He has written a book which is called Sacred Economics. And the clue of that thought is a giving economy and not a grabbing economy. It's just the other way around. I'm not saying that we are there yet, but these kind of thoughts are coming closer and closer by. There's one term which, especially in the States, will be terrible, but here in Europe, it's coming more in the discussion, and that is a basic income. I would say a decade ago, that was a term that was simply not done. Now, even parliamentarians in European countries are using these terms and are getting this on the table. So I think there is progress, because even if the politicians are aware of the big problem we were alluding to, that is this super consumerism, and Florian was talking more about the internet, which is basically magnetizing or mesmerizing people. If you take the social media, the designers of those social media are now coming to a counter movement. They are the people who know how to grab the attention of the mind, how to grab our time, and they are building up a movement to warn us, if it is not too late, that we should not go, or that we should be aware of this. Just to keep it in terms of crisis, there are three things about the crisis. First, we need to recognize that there is a crisis. Then we should see how to transform a crisis into an opportunity. And the third thing is we should seize that opportunity and not let it go by. Okay, that's.
If you allow me to balance also my contribution previously, I think we see some very, very interesting trends. And you were saying about Charles Eisenstein, who is promoting
The gift economy.
Gift economy, yeah, and universal basic income. And such ideas do come into our mind more and more, and they're not ridiculed anymore, or less and less. There's another world where we see very much that a free expression is happening. The digital world, for instance, you see a lot of open source alternatives. You see artists making their work available, or allowing the free use of their work. These instances, I think, are really luminous, and they really are showing us that, so to speak, the light of the soul is cracking the shell.
Well, there's a whole lot of things in the chat. No more hands at the moment, but one, for example, Heidi Kunkler says a signal of soul consciousness is beauty, which links to what you're saying about art, doesn't it? The more beauty you may find in a nation, the more the soul is present. And of course, one thing that occurred to me when we were talking about a capitalism of trade and bargain is that that's a capitalism of true exchange of ideas and qualities, because obviously there are different ideas about what constitute beauty, and the sharing of those ideas and the exchanging of those ideas is one of the beauties of humanity. And there was Janet Derwent says, could the sharing of scientific investigations to find a medical solution to current health challenges be an example of worldwide global soul values of sharing and group consciousness?
Yes, well, I'm trained as a scientist, and I'm always, not to flatter, because I'm not doing any science anymore, but scientists scientists always have formed a group, even at the time of the Iron Curtain, for scientists that didn't exist. The scientists work always, they speak a language which is difficult to understand for laymen, but they exchange ideas, and that has always been the case. In the Middle Ages, they did it in Latin, so people couldn't understand it. But the scientists themselves, they form really a group. So, of course, there are bad things about science too, which I won't go into it. But this is a quality where the soul is easily shining through.
Okay. Still no more hands, but we have from Matthew Martin a comment that a global sharing of money and resources will be a difficult jump for the rich countries, but that is the difference between soul consciousness and mere national personality selfishness. On that note, it was quite encouraging to see that the World Bank is proposing an initiative to allow middle income and poorer countries to access global vaccines for the COVID pandemic. I think that 12 billion, which sounds like a lot, but in the scale of the actual crisis is probably just about, could even be more. But it's encouraging to see that global institutions like the World Bank are doing the sort of thing as well, are speaking out. What else do we have in the chat?
Just to pick up on that, because there is a trend to think that once we have the vaccine, that life goes on as usual. And I think that's a very tricky thought. We are here thinking about crisis and opportunities. This crisis throws everyone back on him or herself. I mean, we have been locked down depending on the country where you are, and in some countries you maybe still be locked down. We are not here in Geneva, fortunately, but the thought is that, okay, once there is a vaccine, we go back to normal. And I think we should be very careful about this, because then what I said just a few minutes ago, then we didn't take the opportunity which is presented to us.
We have a hand up, and that's from Kit Turin or Turin. I don't know. Sorry, I don't want to mispronounce your name, but I've unmuted you, Kit. Hello, can you hear? Kit, are you with us? Oh, you can hear something. Hello.
Hello, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, good. Thank you. I'm in the United States, and well, one little point I want to say before I make the point that I was intending to make is actually it was quite something in the recent presidential primaries that one of the candidates who got actually a lot of interest was someone who did propose a certain, he called it a freedom dividend of money to give to everyone on a monthly basis. It was, you know, small, but that was a big change. But what I was going to say, when we think of the soul of our nation, it's interesting because it can show how a quality that is a soul quality can then be obviously manifest itself in ways that are maybe not so soulful. And I would say an example of this in the United States is clearly we really have gifted the world in many ways around the idea of individual liberties and rights, while at the same time being, you know, the United States. But then again, we can see how we can take this to extremes, the ideas of individual liberty and rights, and how it plays out in different ways, both in our domestic and foreign policies.
There's an excellent point that I think as a humanity we are gradually becoming aware of. It's our interconnectivity, it's our interconnection, and actually the technology of the world makes us more and more realize that we are only one planet. We're really all of us together on the same boat. And this, the topic, of course, of interconnectivity implies that to the extent that one may have individual rights, we gradually understand that our individual rights are in relation to everybody's well-being as well. So individual right somehow transforms into individual responsibility. Rather than the rights for myself alone in my own separate form of cocoon, of happiness, of perception of the world.
Absolutely, and I think it's interesting. You've just reminded me that around, gosh, it must be over 20 years ago, I think I attended a meeting at the House of Commons in the UK, and it was a collection of ex-prime ministers, ex-heads of state, who were promoting a Declaration of Human Responsibilities to mirror, obviously, the Declaration of Human Rights. And I think they gained some traction at the time, and it's like a number of these declarations, they help to attract and focus the higher ideals that we have, and help us see where the vision may lead. And it's a question of how these get translated into practical actions as well, which is always the hard part. So I don't think we have any more hands at the moment.
Maybe just a remark to continue on that remark, or what you've just said. If you take the time after the Second World War, where we had the establishing of the United Nations, the Declaration of Human Rights, Florian has been saying that a lot is going cyclically. We're cycles. It's not a continuous line that's going straight up. Mm-hmm. And I think at that point, we were at a high point where you could see the soul, not only of one nation, but the soul of many nations shining through. I mean, that was really something big, establishing the UN. Of course, we know from more esoteric knowledge that it was stimulated by hierarchy. But it was a high point where you can see these soul qualities coming through. Now then the cycle goes a little bit more down. Where we are now, that's not up to me to say, but maybe we are not in a very high point of this cycle of soul influence.
Mm-hmm. Something that from Nick Ortiz QE, a soul quality is the capacity for understanding, exposing reality. Many things are not worse today than 10 years ago. They're being exposed as part of the evolution of human personality and soul. Shambhala will energy is playing a part of this exposing of situation and bringing about the consciousness for change.
Yes.
Yes. So I think we're probably actually coming towards the end of our time. I don't see any more hands up. Do you have any concluding thoughts that you would like to share, gentlemen, before we?
You have a conclusion?
Well, we have some notes at the beginning, so
Oh.
well, we can always refer to our notes. I think we talked also about Illumin leadership and stuff like this, and the contribution I could submit before everyone, I think, is that when we talk about crises of the world, global opportunities, the individual responsibility is primary, is tremendous. We are not going to have an Illumin leader in a position of power if we have a selfish electorate. So we ourselves have to develop and foster within us the values that we want to see emerge, and our this is our individual contribution. But again, the compounding sum of individual contribution is very relevant. So I name the topic the crisis of consciousness and a crisis of orientation.
Okay, well, I would just like to conclude that we started with the World Goodwill meditation. And of course, most of us will know it. That's the reason why we're here. I only hope that the discussion we have had today will give you a deeper meaning of that meditation. And the next time when we do it, we can do it with even more intention or incentive, because it is a very powerful tool. And I think we should continue to use that tool as much as possible.
Very wise thoughts. Okay, thank you everyone for your participation. Thank you Florian and Minza, and also Michael for running the PowerPoint. And I'd just like to,
yes,
here we go. There are the times for the World Goodwill seminar, which is happening on November the 14th. So we'll just close with a brief moment of silence. Thank you.